The Humanist Response to Authoritarianism by John Simmons, from the August-September 2025 issue of Free Inquiry. That moment, when freedom begins to wither, rarely announces itself with dramatic proclamations. Instead, authoritarianism advances through incremental concessions, each seemingly inconsequential surrender barely perceptible until collectively they form the architecture of tyranny. History has repeatedly demonstrated this pattern, from the Weimar Republic's collapse to more recent democratic backsliding across continents, revealing how fragile the foundations of liberal democracy can be when confronted with determined authoritarian forces. As we witness what some observers have aptly labeled the dumbest fascist timeline, playing out in real time with scandals involving national security conducted over messaging apps, military actions planned with casual disregard for procedure, and the normalization of behaviors once considered unimaginable in democratic governance. Secular humanists face an uncomfortable question. Do we possess distinctive tools to resist authoritarianism's rising tide? Although our sometimes humble worldview cannot do all things at all times for all people, the answer is an emphatic yes. Secular humanism provides a uniquely powerful framework for confronting fascism that religious critiques often cannot match. Historian Timothy Snyder observes that authoritarianism's most insidious quality lies in its banality, the way it transforms everyday life into a series of small surrenders to power. We don't imagine how a regime change is going to be at the dinner table. The regime change is going to be on the sidewalk. It's going to be in your whole life, he wrote. This observation illuminates precisely where secular humanism offers its first distinctive contribution: an increasingly rare commitment to evidence-based reasoning. Where fascism thrives on emotional appeals, historical distortions, and claims of inevitable destiny, secular humanism stands firm on rational inquiry and empirical evidence. These values are anathema to the worst excesses of human cruelty, yet they sometimes feel somewhat milquetoast in contemporary discourse, almost like a vestigial remnant of public conversation rather than its vital center. The tension between reason's quiet persistence and fascism's emotional bombast presents a fundamental challenge to modern intellectual life. Rational inquiry does not naturally capture attention in our media ecosystem, which instead rewards emotional intensity and narrative simplicity. The asymmetry between reason's patience and authoritarianism's certainty requires considerable thought. Perhaps most concerning is how the incremental nature of reason's retreat mirrors Snyder's warning about authoritarianism's gradual advance. The displacement of evidence-based reasoning happens not in dramatic moments of rejection, but in countless small concessions to expediency, tribalism, and comfort. We see this in real time as officials normalize the casual handling of classified information, with supporters willing to accept explanations that would have been unthinkable in previous administrations. The preservation of rational discourse demands not just intellectual commitment, but increasingly moral courage. A willingness to stand against the sometimes overwhelming gravitational pull of satisfying narratives in favor of complex and often uncomfortable truths. The defense of objective truth becomes revolutionary in a post-truth world where the powerful claim the right to define reality itself. The humanist commitment to testing claims against evidence becomes not merely philosophical, but a question of survival. As Shadia Drury notes, with a slight modification on my part, authoritarianism's shamelessness is due in no small part to a postmodern world without truth. This new world encourages authoritarians to do whatever they like and deny it without worrying about lies or contradictions. I changed Trump to authoritarians. The humanist tradition, rejecting arguments from authority and tradition, is, whether we're aware of it or not, a direct challenge to this manipulation. It insists that all claims must be subject to critical scrutiny regardless of who makes them. When government officials can casually respond, "I know exactly what I'm doing," while demonstrably engaging in precisely the opposite behavior, we confront the very essence of what humanist skepticism emerged to challenge. Individual moral agency forms another pillar of resistance against authoritarian tendencies. Citizens should not obey in advance, Snyder warns. Much of fascism is a bluff. The crucial thing is the individual decision to act along with others. This aligns perfectly with secular humanism's core value of individual moral responsibility. Fascism subsumes individuals into collective identities, racial, national, religious. By contrast, humanism insists that ethical responsibility resides in the individual, which is ultimately where it belongs. The notion that each person must think critically, must use their gray matter rather than defer to authority, strikes at fascism's foundation. This presents a stark contrast to the groupthink evident in recent political scandals, where officials rapidly adjust their positions to align with leadership rather than evaluating situations independently. Religious responses to authoritarianism, while occasionally courageous, frequently struggle with an inherent tension. Their hierarchical structures and deference to theological authority can inadvertently mirror the thought patterns that make populations vulnerable to authoritarian appeals. By contrast, secular humanism's epistemological foundation places the individual's rational faculties at the center of moral decision-making, creating a natural resistance to authoritarian demands for unquestioned loyalty. Free inquiry serves as perhaps the most potent tool against fascistic tendencies, particularly in academic settings. The liberal university, characterized by a passion for truth, a disdain for dogma, an aloofness from politics, a belief in the importance of evidence, logic, and reason, represents precisely the kind of institution that can serve as a barrier against fascist thinking. When universities abandon their distinctive commitment to dispassionate inquiry in favor of more instrumental ideological aims, they surrender an important social function that cannot be easily replicated elsewhere. What remains underappreciated in contemporary discussions of higher education is how the practice of free inquiry serves not merely as an abstract ideal, but as practical training in resistance to authoritarian thought patterns. The habits of mind cultivated through rigorous academic discourse, comfort with ambiguity, attentiveness to evidence, willingness to revise conclusions, and intellectual humility, directly oppose the cognitive simplifications that make fascistic thinking appealing. The rejection of noble lies constitutes another distinctive humanist contribution to anti-authoritarian resistance. Snyder notes that the banality of evil in authoritarian regimes manifests as people's remarkable ability to normalize the abnormal and to adapt quickly to new power structures, even morally appalling ones. Our insistence that ethical societies must be built on truths rejects the pull of the status quo, however uncomfortable that rejection is. When government bodies deliberately conduct sensitive discussions on platforms designed to leave no permanent record, with messages set to self-destruct within weeks, a commitment to transparency becomes not merely an abstract value, but a concrete political necessity. Where some religious frameworks accept certain useful fictions as necessary for social cohesion, secular humanism's commitment to intellectual honesty carries an inoculation against the self-deception required to accommodate oneself to authoritarianism. Fascism's perversion of freedom's meaning demands a richer conception of liberty than mere absence of constraint. As Snyder observes, the American right has historically defined freedom negatively as freedom from government, which originally served to prevent federal intervention against slavery and later against various forms of discrimination. The humanist tradition offers an alternative conception of freedom, not just freedom from constraint, but freedom to flourish, to develop one's capacities, to engage fully in democratic life. By reclaiming a positive notion of freedom as the capacity for self-realization and mutual aid, humanists counter the libertarian rhetoric that, for all its foundational arguments against state tyranny, sometimes serves as a gateway to authoritarian politics when it champions a form of liberty detached from the common good and mutual obligation. Consider how rapidly the language of individual liberty transforms into demands for collective submission when confronted with diversity. How quickly calls for freedom from regulation become calls for state intervention against marginalized groups, and how seamlessly the worship of unconstrained markets shifts to embrace strongman economics when capitalism's contradictions become apparent. We witness this exact pattern when officials who once decried government surveillance now casually plan military operations on insecure platforms that violate both security protocols and record-keeping laws. The transition reveals not a contradiction but a continuity. The selective application of freedom as a shield for existing power arrangements, rather than as a universal principle of human dignity. Authoritarianism ultimately demands acceptance of the Orwellian equation that 2 plus 2 equals 5. Stanislav Asayev points out from his experience of torture in Russian-occupied Ukraine. This equation, well known after Orwell's 1984, is being implemented before our eyes. If America destroys one of its own symbols and Russia applauds it from every federal channel, then maybe 2 plus 2 really does equal 5. The secular humanist rejects this equation categorically. Our methodology begins with empirical reality and refuses to subordinate it to ideological demands. When officials claim, "I know exactly what I'm doing," while simultaneously demonstrating profound incompetence, we face precisely the kind of doublethink George Orwell warned against. This is not merely a philosophical stance, but a political one, a refusal to participate in the collective delusion that authoritarianism requires. Do secular humanists have something unique to offer in the struggle against fascism? Absolutely. Our commitment to evidence over dogma, individual moral agency over collective obedience, free inquiry over prescribed truths, universal human dignity over tribal allegiance, and intellectual honesty over noble lies provides not just moral guidance, but practical tools for resisting authoritarianism. This isn't to dismiss the importance of allies in this struggle. Democracy needs all defenders. But secular humanism's distinctive philosophical framework offers an intellectual foundation for resistance that doesn't rely on appeals to divine authority or sacred tradition, no matter what form they take. When Snyder warns that Trump wants to be a strongman, and so if you vote him in, you're basically saying, "Okay, strongman, tell me how to adapt," he is identifying precisely the mindset that secular humanism helps us resist: the abdication of our moral and intellectual autonomy to authority figures who promise certainty in an uncertain world. The humanist response must be, we need not adapt. We need not obey in advance. Armed with our commitment to evidence, reason, and human dignity, we can stand firmly against the authoritarian tide, not because some divine power commands it, but because our shared humanity demands it. Thank you for listening to this audio edition of Free Inquiry, the journal for secular humanist ideas. If you enjoyed this article, consider subscribing to Free Inquiry magazine to explore more thought-provoking content on reason, ethics, science, and free thought. You can find more articles, subscribe, or support our work at secularhumanism.org. There you'll also discover resources on secular humanism, information on upcoming events, and ways to connect with a community of like-minded thinkers. If you believe in the importance of reason, free expression, and humanist values, consider making a donation to support our work. Every contribution helps us continue to publish, advocate, and provide resources for a more rational, secular world. Once again, thanks for listening and for supporting free inquiry, free minds, and free expression.